Hellboy 2019 is directed by Neil Marshall and stars David Harbour as the titular character, and that has been a bit of a contention point for a lot of Hellboy fans who were very happy with Ron Perlman in the first two movies, which were directed by Guillermo del Toro. And so the idea of this movie was a bit apprehensive for a lot of people because those first two movies are considered pretty great. The second one, The Golden Army, considered one of the best superhero movies ever made. Myself included. I really love that movie. That is one of my favorite superhero movies of all time. But I wanted to go in with a clear head, and from this point onwards, I'm not going to talk too much about comparing it to the Del Toro versions. I'm going to talk about exclusively this version. So in this version, Hellboy, played by Harbour, is working at the BPRD. They're catching all sorts of paranormal threats and making sure everything's contained so that the entire world isn't exposed to the nightmares that they have to sometimes behold. On one of these missions, Hellboy encounters someone who tells him about the apocalypse that is to come, the end of days, and a bunch of words that don't quite make sense to him. And in this journey of trying to figure out what's going on, there is a witch played by Mila Jovovich who's been dead for many years, or has she? And she's being resurrected and brought back, and she is going to bring upon the apocalypse with apparently Hellboy at her side into a world of absolute chaos and terror. The potential to do a lot with a reboot is there. Plus, it's been 12 years since the last Hellboy movie came out, and as much as I would have liked to see a Hellboy 3, okay, a fresh take is fine. And also compared to those movies, this one is rated R, which was immediately a gigantic plus point for a lot of people because the Hellboy comics are pretty gory and they're pretty disturbing. So having that in the movies is a pretty good sign. Let's talk about the positives first. I think David Harbour is pretty good in the movie. I think he's a really good Hellboy. He does everything he can that the script gives him to do to be very compelling, and he's really giving a lot to the role. One of my best positives in this movie is that the commitment shown is extraordinary. Everyone is doing everything they can in this film, and Harbour is, I think, doing the most of all. He looks like he's having a lot of fun with this. He did a lot of the stunts on his own, and that you can actually tell. And it's all very impressive. They've done a spectacular job with even the makeup on him. Like, there's actually a lot of great details over there that I thought were really awesome. There's one point in the beginning of the movie where he's shaving his horns, and I kind of like that. Those little things here and there, which they had regarding his appearance, which they highlighted. A lot of people complain that he looks like a raisin of sorts. He looks fine. The supporting cast also, for the most part, is pretty good. This is a very big, over-the-top, violent movie, so certain performances of certain, formats are to be expected. So Mila Jovovich is a certain level of over-the-top, but, for the film that's happening around her, okay. And Daniel Day Kim and Sasha Lane, who are Hellboy's associates in this movie, they're his sidekicks, they're also doing a pretty good job. I was very intrigued, however, by Sasha Lane's character, who is the psychic of sorts. I'd like to see her more if they decide to make more movies to this. And I really like Ian McShane as well as Hellboy's father. I think he did a pretty good job. There is some excellent special effects at a few points, which was pretty cool. At a few points though, that is what I said over there is key. And the musical score is decidedly over the top, but it works for the setting that's been created. It's very similar to how Ludwig Göransson first worked on Black Panther, making a very intricate, beautiful, now Oscar-winning score for it, but he also worked on a more over-the-top movie like Venom, and it worked for that movie. Very similarly, he does the same thing here. He's done a terrific score right now for Shazam, and he's done one over here for Hellboy. So it's kind of a melding of both worlds. That all being said, I found this film to be disappointingly messy. This has some really bizarre decisions, some very strange choices that are made that make absolutely no sense to me. And I found this movie very frustrating to watch at times. One of the biggest issues with this film is tone. It can't find one at all. One of the things about Del Toro's version, I'm sorry if I go into comparison mode here because even though I said I wouldn't, at some things I have to talk about them. Those were still action movies, but there was a dark comedy element to them. So it really went with the zaniness of all of it, and because of that, it helped you get into that world a lot better. Del Toro did a great job of really easing you into the world of the BPRD and the world that Hellboy has grown up in. So you get a very good sense of why you should care about it, And it doesn't also take itself too seriously. It realizes that it's in a campy world where all sorts of craziness exists, and it embraces that craziness. It doesn't try to take itself way too seriously in that regard. Here in this movie, it can't seem to figure out whether at one point it wants to be a very serious movie, or if it wants to be a very funny movie, or if it wants to be something that's in between. And there's also very jarring shifts because there'll be one very serious scene where someone is brutally murdered and you get all the guts and gore just flying all over the place. Body parts are dismembered so much in this movie. This one is particularly violent in a few parts. All of that, okay. But sometimes that'll happen and the very next cut is like a match cut to another scene where a helicopter is landing somewhere and there's like rock music playing in the background. And you're like, wait a minute, we just got this very serious scene here, and now we're suddenly cut to fun, hey, let's go on a mission music. And it's like contemporary rock, which I don't quite understand. At one point in time, I was looking at the person next to me, and we both said the words out loud. We said, Suicide Squad. You can also attribute the fact that Mila Jovovich's villain in this movie, this witch, she's very similar to Enchantress in a few ways. And she also has a big giant by her side who helped make her all powerful again. There's a few parallels to be made in that regard, but the soundtrack is definitely one of them. It's just because it doesn't help figure out a tone of this film. One of the other issues with this film is its editing. It is very choppy. Even though this film is rated R and it is very violent, sometimes it either feels like they cut scenes too short or they've cut things out. And I know those sound like the same thing, but they're not. They're two very different things. And that is very frustrating. It made for a very botched experience at points and very uneven overall. A lot of the ways this film actually goes anywhere is because of David Harbour. He's really giving it his all. In a lot of ways, this film feels like if a fan came in and said, I want to make a movie about Hellboy that's really great. And then you suddenly put in a lot of effort, putting in everything you like about all the comics that you read, and like splash into like one movie, which is like 2 hours long. That's what this film feels like, because there are like 6-7 storylines brought up, and one of them is the main focus, but you know that they're setting up other things on the side as well that they can probably deal with in sequels or so. But one of the other things is that there are no properly defined characters in this movie, including Hellboy. That's something that the Perlman versions did well. They established a certain life for this guy and how he lived a certain way, and you even got insights into how his growing up process was, and how he came to accept certain things. Here they really rush past a lot of that with a boatload of exposition from a lot of characters in several points of the film, except from Hellboy himself. There's a character in this movie played by Daniel Day Kim, who is one of Hellboy's sidekicks in this film, who's this military guy, and he has an entire story about something, and that's a whole story which is happening on the side of action sequence coming up right now, which is big and loud and very crazy. And it just feels like they didn't pick a better way to do this, and I wish they had. The film takes some very lazy approaches that way towards coming to certain conclusions. It's still fun, I'm assuming, if you want to go for a guilty pleasure thing, though, but really, you can't keep having guilty pleasures. That's not how it works. You can't keep doing that over and over again. At one point in time, you've got to make a serious movie and really understand what you're making. This film feels like a lot of things mashed into one, and it doesn't work. There are a lot of fundamental filmmaking issues in this movie, which is something I found very disappointing. David Harbour's performance, like I said, is carrying a lot of it through, but overall, this film just came off as a bit of a mess, and it is very disappointing in the long run. And it's sad because I know they really wanted to make this work. At least David Harbour really wanted to. If nothing else, I hope that they can somehow figure out a way to get better writers maybe, or get a better sense of what to do for the sequels, because that's really needed right now. I'm gonna give Hellboy a 5.5 out of 10. Thank you very much for watching, guys. Look forward to more reviews very soon. As always, if you like this, please do subscribe, and you will, I think, see the review for The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina Season 2 either tomorrow or day after. I finally watched it. Really enjoyed that season. And please do subscribe, and I'll see you guys at the movies.